welcome to today's webinar. Um, it's going to be an exciting webinar. I'm really rapt to be doing this, to co-host this with Thomas. I'll tell you a bit about myself and then I'll handball over to him and he can, for any of you that don't know who he is, he can explain. But my name's Rowan. I work for ANZ UK Education, and that stands for Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom. I am a teacher. I am Australian, and I've taught in the UK, Australia, and Sweden across international schools, public schools, private, Catholic, single sex, co-ed, licorice, all sorts, you name it, I've done it. I love to travel, and I work with a team within ANZ UK that support teachers and teaching assistants and anyone else that works with youth, early childhood educators, anyone that works with young people. If they have a dream of teaching or working abroad in some of the geographies we're going to be talking about today, we support them. We onboard them. We get them into communities, which we'll talk about as well, provide resources, upskilling, and just make sure the whole journey from the time they find us to the time they arrive and start working in that destination country is everything they want it to be. So that is that's pretty much what I do day to day with a team that's based all around the world. I'm currently in Copenhagen, and you probably wonder why, but my wife is Danish, and hence we're over here and trying to support a lot of European-based and Middle Eastern-based educators with their dreams of teaching abroad. So that's a bit about me, and I'll pass it over to Thomas, and he can tell you a bit more about himself.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. I hope you're well. As Rowan described, my name's Thomas Blakemore, and I'm a primary school teacher. I taught in the UK for a couple of years in a challenging school here, and then I decided to look elsewhere in the world to see what I could do, what my options are. And at the time, one of my friends down the road was teaching in Dubai, and it described some of the opportunities that were coming their way. So I decided to make the move. And after 6 tremendous years of teaching in Dubai, I've made loads of different memories. I met my wife to be out there. I've had lots of opportunities to travel and also support other educators with the journey. It's been an incredible experience, and I've been given lots of great opportunities as a result of it. One of the other things that I decided to do, especially during online learning, was to start creating more sort of supportive videos, YouTube videos, to kind of help other people with the process of moving internationally, whether it's Dubai, UAE, further in Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, like we'll talk about in a bit, but then also other areas such as Qatar or maybe even Saudi Arabia. And I've just been doing a little bit of that, helping with the process and creating lots of hopefully free and somewhat informative information to support with that.
Yeah, very engaging information too. I love seeing his video content. So what are we going to be talking about today? It's not going to be just chalk and talk, by the way. There's going to be an opportunity for you guys to ask questions in the chat function during or most likely at the end of the session. Everything's going to be recorded, so you will be able to relive the magic in your own time. And there's some people that aren't able to join us today that they'll also get access to that recording. So we're going to be talking about a number of different countries that Thomas and I have both taught in, and it maybe even some advice that we give you could be good for countries we're not necessarily going to be talking about. It's just typically about traveling abroad and teaching abroad, taking your skill set abroad with you. You are professionals. You are well received around the world. There is a teacher shortage globally. So, and typically most teachers will be able to get visas and things that we're going to talk about during the session. We're going to go into the reasons why you might want to consider teaching abroad. There's lots of different reasons and motivations and pulleys and levers as to why people might consider teaching abroad and how long they go for. We're going to share some of our top tips and tricks around, to make that transition seamless, and, what to pack as an example, what to take, resources, things like that. The fun part, or no, not so much fun, the compliance and the paperwork, it is necessary. Unfortunately, you can't just lob up with your CV and knock on school doors. You've got to really plan to teach and take the time, because relocating the other side of the world is no small task, and sometimes mum and dad and family will really miss you and not want you to go. So there's a bit of discussion to be had there. And then next steps. So if it is something you're interested in, what would be the next steps? What would you like to, what can we provide you, Thomas, and us at ANZ UK? What can we give you for the next steps, whether that's something you want to do this year or next year or further on down the track, or engage with us, have a one-to-one conversation. Anything else, Thomas, you want to add to that?
No, I think you've kind of covered that. I think, like you said, we'll speak about compliance and the importance of understanding paperwork, but that's not always the most engaging bit, but it is absolutely crucial. And I think this conversation is hopefully just to be a little bit excited, help other people feel, passionate and inspired by the end of this conversation to take some sort of action.
Yeah, that's key too. Not just to sit on your hands, but actually like get up and do something about it. I know that I've got countless friends that said they'll always travel and teach abroad when we graduated, and they never did for various reasons, and wish they had have, because a holiday in a different country is very different to living and teaching and being part of that community and culture. And Thomas, I'm sure you can attest to that too. So
100%.
yeah, so this infographic is quite cool in a way, because I'm thinking, well, why can't you do it all? Like what a straight line. It's suggesting here that you could literally teach your way around the world for the rest of your life if you wanted to. And as I said, there's lots of other countries on here that we won't be talking about, but you could absolutely be eligible for. So Thomas he's the expert on the UAE. I can give you some information, and Thomas can, about the UK, because he's obviously British, but also Australia and New Zealand. Yes, it is a long way. I always say, if you're going to travel from anywhere here down to here, why wouldn't you do as much as you can down here, e.g. teach in multiple countries, Australia and New Zealand? But we will talk a bit more about that as we go on. I'm sorry if you're hearing beeps. I thought I'd put this, I thought I'd allowed anyone to enter the session, but apparently I haven't. So I'm going to just you have to bear with me. So some amazing footage here, some of Thomas's pictures of what he's been up to. Why don't you tell us, Thomas, some of the motivations or the reasons that you decided to take your teaching to the UAE?
Okay, so I think to start off with, I had reached a point in my career where I wasn't really sure if that was going to be everything for the rest of my life. I could kind of see, right, if I continue with where I'm going, maybe in 10 years' time, or I'll be head or deputy head in my school, but then that's all I would have seen, all I would have known, wouldn't have potentially seen and experienced other curriculums or styles of curriculums, which is also important to understand, because certain countries have adaptations of certain curriculums. And I was just a little bit intrigued, if you like, to see where else in the world this could kind of take me. So, like I said before, I had a neighbor, friends who was going through the experience, and I just started to have a little look online. And that's one thing I'd say straight away, is just to do as much research as you can as you're going through that process, because just taking that opportunity to look and just kind of, it's not recruitment window at the moment, but see what schools are out there. And as you do that, just start to look at the schools and go, okay, for me, looking at the facilities of some of these international schools in the UAE, I was going, wow, that is completely different. And I'm sure that will come with a new set of challenges in comparison to my smaller school in the UK. And I think for me, it was really helped me with kind of thinking, right, if I've got all these different facilities available, whether it's technology based, whether it's sports based, I know that I've got certain skills that will align to those facilities. And that's going to really help me with my CV to kind of, whether I'm creating clubs or doing things within the curriculum to align with those facilities, I'll be able to put those on my CV going forward, which is absolutely true. Alongside that, I'd also reached a point in my life where, having taught in the UK, which is absolutely amazing, I was able to travel to lots of different places around Europe. Ryanair and EasyJet, they were my best friends. I was NQT, ECT wage, which back then wasn't fantastic. So, with my one rucksack, I was traveling around to as many cheaper countries as I can. So, traveled to, Poland, Budapest, Amsterdam, as many as I could try and get to. But around that time as well, I started to realize, well, a lot of the cheaper flights, they're going to countries that are a little bit more expensive and perhaps out of budget. So I was starting to think, right, if I went and traveled and worked overseas, perhaps I'd be able to go to some of the other cheaper countries countries that were around there too, such as India, Sri Lanka, and so I did. I mean, the picture that I've used is perhaps a bad example. That's the Maldives. It's given me the opportunity to travel to lots of different places, and experience a range of different cultures and curriculums too. So we'll perhaps talk about that. But what about you, Rowan? What's your experience been of teaching internationally?
I think I had the travel bug at a young age. I'd lived overseas with my family. Both parents are teachers, but they never pushed me into teaching. I sort of fell into it. So I think I'd always wanted to travel like you, and I'd done a bit of travel before I graduated. I actually came back from my first year abroad and did my diploma in teaching, on top of my Bachelor of Arts, and because I had the intent to go back to the UK or to wherever and teach. So I think, and that's not to say that Australia has got bad schools or anything like that. I just had this travel bug that I wanted to go abroad and use, and teaching was a great vehicle to do that. Teachers are appreciated around the world. As I said before, it's a fair income in most countries. I know the ones that we work in, it's a fair wage, if not more than fair in some instances. I knew I could live comfortably. I knew I had holidays. I knew when they were. I knew when I could book the holidays based on the school calendar, which is a bonus. You can always get in early and get those Ryanair flights like you were talking about, Thomas. Um, to be honest, I wasn't thinking about um, accelerating my career. I knew it would make me a more confident teacher. Travel. I knew it'd be because you're a risk taker if you're considering teaching abroad, I think. But I didn't think it was going to make me climb the ladder any quicker. Although I do now. I think I realise now that principals that we work with in Australia, UK, New Zealand, we present them with an educator looking for a role in their school that has a CV enriched with international experience, exposure to different cultures, students, curriculums, head and shoulders above everyone else in the interview process. Hand on heart. So just shows you're a confident, risk-taking educator that's well travelled. All the things that the principals want to see, and hopefully they think also that you've got rid of the travel bug and they can hold on to you for a long period of time as well. So they're my motivations, and I think I look at my career so far in teaching in the classroom, and the people I met, the students I met, the staff I met, and the friends I still have from those adventures, I guess, and exposure, and I really cherish them. So I think it's, I always looked at it as a working holiday. I think that's sort of what I always went into teaching abroad as. I'm not going to work the whole time. I'm going to work some of the time to supplement my travel when I want to travel. And I think, the educators I talk to have different motivations. Some people just really I only want 2 days of work a week, and I'm going to travel 5 days and surf and bungee and do all these other things. And other people go, no, I want ownership over my own class. I want a contract for a year or 2 years, or I'm relocating for good. I don't want to be in different schools or different settings. So I think it really depends on, and some people go for 6 months, some people go for a year, 2 years, 6 years, forever. So I think it really depends on who you are and your reason for travel. But even if you're not unsure, I'd just still suggest, considering even a short 6 month, 12-month research trip to find out if it's really for you, and then jump in for a longer period or stay for longer. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think in terms of leadership acceleration, you'll see countries like the UAE, you get a lot of people who come to the UAE and they have that plan. They've got a 2-year contract, so you're a little bit more restricted in the way that you've got to have a contract with the UAE, whereas I know Australia might be a little bit different. So you come with that two-year plan, but a lot of people start to go, okay, 2 years, I've settled now. Maybe you've met someone, and they start to look at other things that are available. And out here, because the schools are so huge, which is why the facilities are incredible, then all of a sudden people go into different roles. So different roles exist in schools out in Dubai or wherever else in the GCC region. So you'll have things like house leader and heads of subject roles, which are actually big paid roles instead of something that's just included in your pay. And then what happens from there is that people start to move on because it's a little bit more transient, and then those new leadership roles open up. So then all of a sudden you find yourself in a position where you're able to progress up into different stages of leadership that you perhaps wouldn't have been able to in other places too. And I think for myself, having that experience of international education, I've been able to really experience just different cultures and become a bit more open to things that I perhaps wouldn't have been open to in the past. You know, the picture that you'll see there is on National Day. Uh, and I had no clue what the Emirati traditions and cultures were. When I first moved to Dubai, I had a very Western outlook, if you like, on what that type of culture was like. And I've soon come to realize after 1, 2 years, of course, I've been there 6 now, that a lot of my ideas and thinking were actually quite different to the ways that I'd kind of preconceived, if you like. So even if you just go in, like you said, for a year, just to test it out, 2 years perhaps, having that experience and just doing something different can also give you that opportunity to step outside your bubble too and just kind of experience things that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to before.
And how did you go about finding your first position in Dubai? Like, was that something you stumbled across when you're in the UK, or you were told about?
So you could, for me personally, I was very privileged in the way that I did know someone, and ultimately that's how that position came about. But I ended up with 2 jobs at the same time. One was from my own research, application, and going through that process, and the other one was, like I said, about the person who I knew. For me, I kind of did a bit of a holiday, a bit of a recce trip. Obviously, certain places in the world are a little bit more further away, so it's not always possible. But with one of the holidays and with a love of travel, I kind of went, well, let's go and check it out at least. And I liked it that way. I kind of tried to visualize myself in that way. And then when I returned from that holiday, that's when I really started to put my research head on. I went through a range of different websites, TESS being the biggest one, but also just networking with different schools as well to see what's out there, whether you're using things like LinkedIn to just keep an eye open for different positions, whether you're using different Facebook groups. So I've got a Facebook group called United Academic Educators where some leaders will sometimes post jobs, especially last minute. Um, but for me personally, I went through the process of tests. I had to apply to the one that I knew someone. I had to apply for that normally, even though I did know someone. And then for the other job as well, I had to go through that website as well. But then some people go directly straight through the websites because a lot of these platforms that advertise jobs have huge fees. So sometimes schools, especially more popular schools, will just post it straight onto the website. So it's important to know what's available and also be aware of different job positions that come up too.
Yeah, I think, you obviously did it a different route to how we operate. We've got the existing contacts with the schools, which we'll talk about, but it's
Yeah.
I think referrals are just, word of mouth. You trust a friend, you trust someone that's worked in a school. They wouldn't give you misleading information, and we're not going to do that either. But I think when I look at all the educators we've supported, how they've found their roles with or without us, it's typically ended up well for them. And we obviously try and match your skill set with the right type of school. We wouldn't chuck you into any school that
Mm.
didn't align with you or your values or your preferences. So I think a lot of work goes into that, from where I sit anyway. So um, we move into the next slide, and I think this is going to be a good one. So I was going to say get your pens and paper out, but you're going to get a recording of this anyway, so you don't need to. Um, so I think we just touched on this. Finding your own role before you arrive. You had 2 roles offered to you before you left the UK. One off your own bat and one through a friend. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 roles, and especially with the UAE, you have to have that role because it's the school that will sort out your visa and do all of that work for you. Um, so having that role is absolutely essential. And I had that contract through, was able to sign that contract, and then I knew that when I arrived, then I'd be pretty much set.
Yep. Well, I think I'll let you know what we do in that instance. So we, as I said before, some educators are happy just to arrive in Australia, UK, New Zealand, and do that casual emergency relief teaching daily, with no, extracurricular responsibilities or assessment, and that's what they want: 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week, whatever. But a lot of other educators will say, no, I want this security, particularly post-COVID. I want job security. I want to know that I've got a job before I've left my home country. I want to work in this type of school with this age of students in this subject. And I think that's what we have two teams. We have a temp team that look after all that casual work when you arrive, but also a permanent opportunities team that are out there hunting for you before you do arrive for that perfect school that aligns with you, and getting you prepared for interview. Making sure that you nail that interview when you have that remote interview with that school. So ideally, have a job before you arrive, and have a mentor. Have the resources, have a timetable, have the behavioural management policy of the school, the bell times, all that stuff. So you go in really armed and prepared to hit the ground running. So again, it depends on what type of educator you are and what you're hoping to achieve out of this working abroad, with whether it is casual relief work or whether it is something more permanent or more contract. And contracts could be anything from 6 weeks to permanent that our team manage. So there's lots of avenues, and I think to getting your dream role, and I think what a lot of other educators do is start in a casual capacity, get a feel for the schools and the curriculum and the culture, and maybe work in 2 or 3 schools repetitively because they're doing such a great job. The schools want to keep them back and keep that continuity humming along. And then, as you say, opportunities just create themselves. Like, before you know it, you started on a 2 days a week at this school, and they're suddenly offered you a 6-month contract because they love you, and you've had a chance to really test the water, dip your toes in, and you can go, this is exactly the type of school I want. I'm happy to sign a contract for a year or two. Did you see that happen in the UAE as well, Thomas?
No, but I was going to say that if we were talking about the pros and cons of different countries, then Australia, New Zealand, UK, you do have that flexibility. That is an absolute pro. With the UAE, you have to be so rigorous with the things that Rowan said about different behaviour policies, what the school's like, having different reviews from different educators, because you're somewhat tied in to that contract of 2 years. They have probation periods there, but it's not nice to leave a position within 6 months. No one wants to go through that process really, although that is there as an option. So I think, if I had that opportunity to go and work in different schools, if I had my time again, I mean, I've ended up working in a school that I ended up loving, which is why I stayed at the same school for 6 years. But at the end of the day, having that flexibility to just go and test out, it's almost like that, isn't it, Rowan? You're testing out different schools
Exactly.
to see, does this suit myself? So that is absolutely a pro of the UK, New Zealand, Australia, for sure.
Something we didn't talk about earlier, but I'm glad we did now. I guess the other thing too is I typically think if you've got the travel bug and you want to travel and teach, it may mean more than one country. Like, it may mean more than one school in that country as well. So you might want variety. You might want different types of schools, public, private, whatever it might be in one country. But you could also, as I said before, if you were traveling, as an example, all the way to Australia from the UK or wherever you are right now, why wouldn't you consider teaching in New Zealand? It's such a long way. Like, I don't think too many educators want to go directly back home straight after a year. They want to continue their travel, or like you did through Southeast Asia as an example. So I think it's like, we've got to get out of that mindset. I tell my team, it's not just one country. Maybe these educators we work with and we support, maybe they want to work in 3 different countries, and we can help them do that. Maybe they just travel for the rest of their lives, just teaching in different countries and climbing the ladder and filling that CV with rich experience. So I can't say that there's a perfect country for you out there. There could be many. I think the countries that we work with, and it sounds like where you in the UAE, the schools you worked in, Thomas, the curriculums were very similar, and often British curriculum or Cambridge curriculum, or I know the Australian and New Zealand curriculums are very similar to the UK. I know the international schools I taught at in Sweden, they were based on American curriculum. So I don't think there's going to be too many huge variances between what you currently know and how you deliver it to your students as to how it is delivered in a different country. We teach maths the same way in Australia as we do in the UK. The answer is always the same, to a problem. So I don't. Apart from the length, there could be some of you out there that English might not be your mother tongue, which is fine as well. There's still opportunities, and great opportunities for those educators that are coming from countries where English isn't the first language or the mother tongue language. So there could potentially be lots of countries out there that you could have the right to work in. That's the other thing too, that we'll talk about visas, and some of them are age restrictive. But typically, if you can get a visa for one country that we're talking about today, you typically can get visas for the other countries as well. Anything else you want to talk around that point, Thomas?
No, I think you're right in terms of whether you're speaking about visas. I think we'll speak about that a little bit later on. That with visas, age restrictions, they can apply both ways, both being too young and at times, unfortunately, too old for certain countries as well, like the UAE.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I think a lot of schools also prefer younger graduates, inexperienced graduates, because they can almost mold them to fit the culture that they want within their school. And then again, other schools will request, we only want to consider educators with 3 or more years experience for this role, as an example. But there's something for everyone. There absolutely is. There's all types of schools with all types of needs. Being resource ready, this is something that, a question comes up quite often. Back in the day when I was traveling, there was no clouds full of information. They were only full of rain. So I was carrying a lot of paper and a lot of books and a lot of heavy things in my 23 kilograms of luggage allowance on the flight. But now, obviously, it's a lot easier to have your lesson plans in a cloud or on a USB stick. And I think, the kind of advice we give is typically your lesson plans that you have now are relevant to another country, and and students will be curious about your take on things and who you are and where you're coming from. Lesson plans on history, geography, maths, English, art, whatever, it's all really relevant. But I would say my top tip around resources would be, I did a lot of temporary relief work when I first started out, and I think I wish I had more ice-breaking, get to know you 2-minute, 3-minute games that I could have played at the start of each lesson to get to know the kids, and for them to get to know me and show a bit of the human side of who I was. I wish I'd had more of those fun activities, and that's what I tell all the educators I talk to now. Like, collaborate with all your cohort that you graduated with, and all the teachers you work with right now. What are the games that they play that get kids on side, that that can really help establish those relationships? What would you say your tips around that could be, Thomas?
I think in regards to being resource ready, you kind of just want to make sure that as soon as you start, you're ready to hit the ground running. What's nice in the UAE is, you don't just start on the first day with the kids. You get like this strange week where all the staff are required to come back, and all the staff come back. There's no kids, so you get like a week or so to get things ready. But even though you have that time, because of all the different training, things go fast. Things go extremely fast. So having a few things at your disposal, whether it's like you're saying, warming up, icebreaker type games with the class, those things are so easy to find online. But knowing that you have them available, whether it's tried and tested things or new things, is also really useful. Obviously, as a primary school teacher, you know that there's typically going to be 3 or 4 displays that you're going to need to have. So English, maths, probably some sort of science. You won't probably know your topic, but if you're going through a transition of one year to the next year from one school to another school, you can take your English lettering, if you've got the letters, English, maths, science, that saves a huge job. And it doesn't weigh a huge amount either. You've got to be somewhat conservative with your luggage, but just having those things available to just quickly slap on a wall so you can focus on other things just saves you a lot of time, cutting, laminating, those sorts of things can take a lot of time.
Yeah, I forget the bag of tricks that primary teachers need to carry around with them. I'm a secondary trained teacher. The other thing I didn't mention is that we have a learning management system that we give access to all our educators to, and it has modules around curriculum and behaviour management, special needs in Australia, UK, New Zealand, whatever, and the differences to make sure that you get upskilled 6 to 12 months before you arrive in that country. So you go in again warm, knowing a bit about the culture, the students, or maybe not necessarily the students, but curriculum and expectations of assessment and things like that. So, but you're not starting from scratch. That's the main thing. If you're a qualified teacher in your home country, you're recognised most likely in Australia or New Zealand or the UK, wherever, or the UAE. You're not starting again. You are ready to rock and roll. So have the confidence to take what you learnt from those years of study into the classroom in a different country. Briefly touched on this before. Most of the educators that we've worked with in the past travel solo. They're not traveling with partners. They're not traveling in groups, which can be really exciting and really scary at the same time. You know, you may not know anyone in the arriving country. I don't know if you knew anyone in the UAE at the time, Thomas, but so we go to great lengths to ensure that you are part of our online community of teachers heading to the same destination you are, or maybe already there, or maybe even in your home country right now that are looking to go to the same place you are as well. And we host, wherever we can, pre-departure events where we go to a cafe or a restaurant or a bar, and we get together and have a couple of drinks and share some stories. We also invite people that have come back from their adventure to their home country to those events. And then we also have post-arrival events. So when you do get to your destination country, you're surrounded by other educators that have just arrived from other countries. And what typically happens is you make these networks and connections, and you end up living with these people. They might have a room to rent or a house share, buying a car, teaching in the same schools, traveling to the same places during your school holiday breaks, becoming lifelong friends. And that's really important to us, that community piece. And ideally, we want to meet everyone we can in person before they leave their home country. It's not always we're not always able to do that, but certainly when you arrive, we make sure that our team are around and asking more about the not just the teaching side of things, but what about, how's your accommodation hunt going? Have you made any friends? And making sure the whole adventure is everything that you want it to be, not just finding the right job, but making sure you're with the right people, living in the right area, that whole adventure is everything you want it to be. How did you find the community or networking in a community in the UAE, Thomas?
Yeah, so I did come over alone. Yes, I had that one person who I knew. So I was able to kind of do a few things, but for the most part, I was pretty much solo. And I always say now to people who are coming out, just say yes to everything until you meet your people. And it can be a bit expensive, but it's one of those things that people know what it's like to, especially in UAE, people know what it's like to arrive in the same position, you know, solo, not knowing anyone, having moved into perhaps their first own apartment like I did, and perhaps feel somewhat daunted. So, you know, you'll find that people want to do things like going for different meals, different nights out, bits and pieces like that. And even if, you know, those things aren't necessarily the things that you enjoy doing, initially, until you meet your people, like try and go along with as much as possible, because you'll soon start to realize, oh, okay, this night out isn't this person's typical thing that they like to do either. Like, okay, we find that shared interest that me and this person don't like nights out, so let's go to a cafe instead. Oh, actually, this person also wants to just go to this cafe. All right, so we're a bit more chill, a bit more laid back, so we can do that. And then you soon start to meet what I call your people, and those are the friends that you eventually form lifelong relationships with, and you're able to kind of do things more regularly with them. And obviously, one of the biggest perks of being a teacher as well is that you have that group of friends who you do work with, and you're able to form those relationships there. If you're talking about other professions, perhaps that's not always possible. So that's always great. I always do say that it's nice to have a group of friends outside of work so that the conversations don't just become all school related. But yeah, saying yes to everything until you meet your people, that would be my tip.
I like it. Yes, man. We also briefly mentioned the things that you need to pack and wear, and I guess my 2 cents around this is we'll certainly tell you the types of schools and if there is a dress code around that, and I'm sure you can talk about that too, Thomas. But typically smart casual in the schools that we work with, unless it's a prestigious independent school that expect, you know, suits and ties and things like that. It's typically smart casual. But outside of that, you can certainly buy clothing and things in the destination country in most cases, or at least if you're over your luggage limit, you can post boxes of clothing you may not need directly when you arrive, that for colder climates or warmer climates, that will arrive 2 or 3 months later on a boat or on a plane. That's another way to do it. But I think another tip that someone had told me was to take a power board from Australia. So with the 4 plugs, so I only have to buy one translator, one of those, one adapter for the UK, and I could plug my laptop, or the iPhones weren't around then, but I could plug 4 different things in at once rather than having to use this one plug for 4 different things or buy 4 different plugs. So that was sort of my illuminating experience around the secret things to pack. Did you have anything like that, Thomas?
Yeah, I think UAE is a nice one because it's going to be pretty much hot no matter what. You might want one jumper in your 23 kilograms. So if you're thinking about perhaps a case, Emirates give 30 kilograms, you'll want a jumper of some sort. But it's not smart casual in Dubai. Typically, it's a little bit more formal. It's one of the things that I always find a little bit more challenging is, it's not suits, but you are looking at shirt and tie if you're a male. And of course, because it's a Muslim nation, you are going to want to cover your shoulders and knees when you're teaching as well if you're female. So you're looking at longer dresses and things that cover your shoulders too. So that's something to be aware of. But because, you're kind of looking at one temperature, which is hot, you can get away with packing very similar items. You don't need extra coats and things like that really until you get to kind of the winter months where it's only really colder in the really early morning, and believe it or not, in the cinemas get extremely cold, so that's when you'd want that jumper. And then in terms of things that I would definitely recommend packing, I think things like sun cream, believe it or not, in the UAE, there's certain things that you need to just kind of research because things like sun cream in the UAE are so expensive compared to the UK. There's not so many things like Aldi in the UAE, so that those things can get quite expensive. So knowing the nuanced things of what's expensive is also quite important. And if you're traveling halfway or maybe all the way around the world with Australia and New Zealand, one thing I always recommend packing is actual printed photos. Again, yeah, of course you can print those things off quite straightforward when you get to your next location, but that's an extra task. So just bringing a few photos can help you feel closer to home straight away. You're able to slap them in a photo frame and it can just make wherever you are feel a little bit more homely. And I always think that's a little bit more of a special tip of what to pack, certainly photos.
It's a great idea. I'll vouch for that too. The old-fashioned photo wall is always a good one, rather than the digital version. And talking about housing, how did you go about finding yours in the UAE?
So housing for me, so there's 2 ways that schools will do it. Typically, most big schools, whether it's Gems, Kings, there's loads of big school branches, will actually provide you with accommodation. So you arrive, they'll maybe put you in a hotel for 2 nights, and then they'll take you to your accommodation that they've already set up for you. In so many ways, that is very, very straightforward, and that allows you to just move straight in, set up your place. I had a different option, which is accommodation allowance. Which means that you can essentially go through the normal process of being a normal resident, choosing your own accommodation, renting that out. So if I wanted to find a cheaper place and maybe save some of the accommodation allowance money, I can do that. Nowadays, rent is extremely expensive. So taking accommodation allowance doesn't always actually account for how much rent is. So you've got to be kind of conservative with money there. Unfortunately, I didn't always have the greatest feedback on what to do when setting up my accommodation. I find that part really challenging, which is why I ultimately ended up writing a guide to support teachers with moving over to the UAE. It was a bit more challenging to set it up, but I would definitely say if you have that option of schools setting up your accommodation for you, to go with that at least for the first 2 years so that everything's set up. Otherwise, it's okay, but it can be a little bit more stressful if you're setting it up yourself.
Yep. Yeah. Well, for the geographies that we support, we don't have a house for educators. We have partnerships with Airbnb, well not Airbnb, Contiki and hostels and things like that to get your feet on the ground when you first arrive, get a few nights under your belt, get over the jet lag, and then start the hunt for your accommodation. And we, as I said before, in our communities, there's lots of educators that are already there saying, hey, we've got a room to rent. We've got 2 rooms to rent, or we're leaving Australia. We've got a house to rent. Who'd be interested? Or who wants to go and inspect properties together? We're looking for a 3-bedroom house in northern Melbourne or Sydney or London or wherever it might be. And we'd also forward some reputable real estate agents that are trustworthy. But we'd always say, never sign a lease unless you've physically, or someone's physically checked the place out, and it's where you want to be. And that's why getting to the country, getting some temporary accommodation, getting a travel card, checking out the city that you're in and going, I need to be close to public transport, I need to be close to schools, parks, gyms, pools, whatever your bag is, whatever you're into, making sure that you're living where you want to live, and again, living with the right people is really important. So we'd say do your homework. Absolutely. Language, we've taught in countries where English isn't the mother tongue. Did you have any challenges with that in the UAE, Thomas?
Yeah, I think that's why the question mark is really there. Is a lot of people assume that you maybe moving to the UAE or another nation and you're going to find that you struggle with English, and no, not really. It's English is widely spoken. I suppose in some ways it's unfortunate because I've not really come away from Dubai having learned any Arabic.
Yeah.
Because I'm just able to use English, and even those cultures that perhaps don't speak English, they use almost like a broken English, and you're able to communicate very straightforward with all the different countries that we're on about today. So I wouldn't worry too much about language.
No, it's the same, and it's the same with geographies we support. I mean, to be a teacher, if you didn't study in English, you would need to pass an IELTS test. So you need to get certain scores, and I've written a blog on that, and I can share it with people out there. But typically, you need to score, 7s or 8s out of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. 3 parts of that you can do online, and 1 part you need to do in person. But most of the educators we talk to have got a level of English that is passable or adequate for that IELTS academic version of the test. But again, we can talk through that one-on-one. But I remember being a student back in the day, long time ago, but having someone with a different accent, I thought was so cool. Having someone coming into the classroom, Ireland, from the UK, from Europe, from Africa, Middle East, wherever they're coming from, I just thought it was, this is amazing. This, I grew up in a small country town. To have someone with that sounds a bit different to me was very refreshing. So it's already a novelty, and it'll never get old. So language is very fun. Technology tips, this is probably more for you, more something that you wanted to talk about, I think, Thomas, but VPNs.
Oh, I love a good technology.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
You're of that generation, but tell us a bit about the VPNs and the AirTags.
So there's all sorts of different technology tips I could talk to you about. If you're moving abroad, even if summer holidays and you're just wanting to enjoy things, VPNs certainly really important when looking at teaching, whether it's in the UAE or elsewhere in the world. I mean, VPNs can be useful just for watching certain programs, because when you go from, let's say, to UK to Australia, all of a sudden the programs that were available in the UK might not be available in Australia. So using a VPN, you can switch things. So you can switch on to, for example, UK servers, and then you're able to access Netflix, which is in the UK. But then even little things like when you're looking at Christmas shopping, or you're looking to Google things and compare the prices between UK and UAE and UK or Australia, and you want to see different websites. If I Google Amazon in the UAE, of course, I'm going to get UAE Amazon. But if I turn the VPN on, and then search Amazon, then I'll get the UK websites pop up and different associated websites around that. So VPNs can just be a useful thing. And it also, there's the issue of security online, especially when you first move to a new country. You'll be using lots of different public Wi-Fi's. For the most part, if you're using what's called like HTTPS, you're pretty much safe. But having a VPN, I always think, just gives you that extra layer of security when you're using things online, especially if you're using different online banking services and things like that. I like to just think, okay, that's got some sort of security behind it. And AirTags, much in the way of security. If you're shipping your one case of 30 kilograms and you know that that's your whole life, you don't want to lose that. So just having an air tag inside a bag can be the difference of an airline saying, we've lost your bag, and you being like, well, I don't know where that's gone, versus we've lost your bag, and you can go, well, no, it's there. I know lots of people who are able to kind of say that to different airlines and airports and say, well, this is where my AirTag says the bag is, so get someone to go and find it, sort of thing. Versus it's gone.
Brave new world. So it's kind of like an Find My iPhone process. You've just got some sort of thing I've never heard of it, but in your bag that you can track if it's wherever it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. Nice one. Yeah. Certainly wasn't around when I was traveling. We just had the plastic tags, not the air tags, just attached to the bag with your name on it. I'm sure you've got lots of other tips, but people can, I guess, reach out to you and look at some of those blogs and resources that you talked about later on. Because
sure.
I'm just conscious of time. But best time to arrive. So school years, what do they look like in different countries? Typically in the Southern Hemisphere, in Australia and New Zealand, it's school years from late January up until Christmas time. 4 terms, 10-week terms, 2 weeks in between each term. The summer breaks, 6 to 8 weeks. So if you're looking at a contracted role, you want a job before you get there or soon after you arrive, you want to align your arrival with the start of a term. And typically, for the educators leaving now, I'm saying if you want a job in January, you want to be there in September because you want to interview with schools for those January roles. Principals want to know and want to interview educators, some up to 6 months before the start date of that job, 3 to 6 months. So they're always thinking a term or two in advance of what staff they need, primary, secondary, whatever it might be, for that term, which is 3 or 6 months away. So that doesn't. Some do happen instantly, but it's rarer. When someone pulls out of a role. So if your preference is a contract, if your preference is permanent opportunity, I always say you want to start the new school year in January. You maybe want to arrive or at least be considered for an interview around September. Be ready, have your CV, have your referee details ready, all that stuff. If you're looking at just temp work, like those casual relief days, I'd typically say any time of the year, outside of the first and last week of each term. But I can tell you the busiest period in the Southern Hemisphere, as an example, in Australia and New Zealand, for work, all types of work, is between Easter and October, which are the cooler months in the Southern Hemisphere. But that's when we don't have enough. Definitely do not have enough educators. We have to tell schools we don't have enough educators. Sorry, we can't help you today. And then in the UK, a bit different school year there. It's just finished. As of last week, the school year finished. Everyone's on summer holiday, including Thomas, and starting the new academic year the first week of September. And 3 terms with midterm breaks in between. So I think teaching worldwide, I think roughly 12 to 13, 14 weeks holiday is sort of the norm, 12 weeks norm. Thomas, you might be able to say something around that. But and you'll know when those holidays are, and there's public holidays or bank holidays in between them. But yeah, if you're thinking contract, if you're thinking perm, you need to be really thinking 3 to 6 months in advance, because you want to be in alignment with the start of each term, because contracts typically start then. But again, if you're looking at casual work, it could be any time of the year. But we have this program called Guaranteed Casual Relief Work, which is every day of the week we guarantee it, even if you don't get offered it. And we pay you for it, and that's typically between middle of March up until late October. So there's a course for every horse, so or a lid for every pot, as one of my team members say. So whatever you're looking for, we can unpack that arrival piece with you. What would you like to say about that in UAE terms, Thomas?
Yeah, best time to arrive in the UAE is very similar to kind of the UK. Your main recruitment period, though, is kind of November, when they start to look at the new school year and what classes they'll have, all the way through to kind of April, when they start to know different people who are leaving. So you've got those 2 there. And then arriving in the UAE, you're going to typically be looking a little bit earlier than the UK, sort of anywhere between early mid August because the school year starts a little bit earlier than the UK, like a week or so earlier. Because you've also got that time, like I said before, about that 1 week of preparation time. So that's why you kind of go back 1 week earlier. But that's always
Yep.
nice too, because you
Yep.
get that opportunity to settle and do things like that. So that's good.
Yeah. Good advice and good insight. So that we're not going to go onto this too much, but yeah, obviously there are visas. You can't just rock up to a country and expect to work. You need to have the right to work. We can give advice in some instances, but in other instances, we partner with a migration expert for anyone coming to Australia, as an example. But in a nutshell, many countries are able to access working holiday visas. Many people from many countries are able to access it. Now, we talked a little bit about it before. If we put our Australia-bound hat on, those people that want to work in Australia, working holiday visas are typically up until the age of 30, and in some instances 35. There's a number of countries that you can be up to 35, e.g. UK, Ireland, Brazil, Italy, Denmark, Canada, and a few others, but the rest are typically up to the age of 30. And then if you fall outside of that, there are opportunities around skilled visas. So they cost a little bit more, but they give you a bit more freedom and the right to work for 4 or 5 years in Australia, as an example. And then outside of that, you're looking at sponsorship, where a school would go out and say, we want this teacher, we're prepared to be their sponsor. Now that's a lot harder to get in Australia than it is in the UK, as an example, but by the most popular visa, I'd say, are the working holiday visa, and that's something you can start on and then transfer into a skilled or a sponsorship visa. Schools are more inclined to sponsor someone that has worked on their campus or with their students, rather than someone they've never met before, as an example. What about visas for the UAE, Thomas? Was that a difficult step, or?
No, I think visa's probably the most simple step, because the school sorts it out for you. I think if I can nail these four in 1 minute. So visas are sorted out pretty much for you if you've got that job set up. Schools have an obligation. It's law that the school has to pay for that visa, so you don't need to worry about that in the UAE. Teaching qualification that's needed. You need some sort of QTS, so whether it's from SCIT in the UK, or something like that, you need qualified teacher status, and that qualification needs to be aligned to the subject that you're going to teach, especially if it's kind of secondary related. If you've got a maths degree, you can't then go and be an English teacher, and vice versa. Primary is a little bit more flexible, but then in terms of having it attested, you need your documents attested for the country that you're going to go and teach in. It is an expensive process. I work with companies to try and find a little bit more of a discount. You can always do it yourself, but that can sometimes take a little bit more time. And then having references is always crucial. They will write to references to make sure that you've got them. But then the process of having your kind of CV prepared is key as well. And I suppose that's you're taking the first steps by being on this call in the first place, making sure that you have relevant research, so you can go through that process and look at those things too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I keep talking about Australia, but it's actually quite a popular destination that we work with. But each state has their own teaching authority, and we don't say who can teach and who can't. It's up to each teaching authority. And I'm registered with the Victorian version, and Thomas, we talked about this, but typically you have to have 4 years of tertiary training, inclusive of teacher training, and 45 days minimum of practicum placement during your study that's observed by the university to be considered a teacher in Australia. And unfortunately, the SCIT that you just talked about and the Teach First or Teach Direct accelerated programs in most cases won't be accepted. There is further study required. So, but again, that's specific to individuals on the call that we'd unpack. But they're the boom gate. They say whether you can teach, you can't. And once they give you the green light, we find you the job. References, as you said, critical. Yeah, and we typically ask for 2 in leadership roles that can attest to the last 2 years of your teaching experience or your studying to be a teacher. to like professors, lecturers, principals, managers, directors, not fellow teachers. And then helping you get that CV ready. We have a template, and if you are looking at getting a contract or a permanent role, preparing you for that interview so you can absolutely go in there and you know what they're going to ask you, and you know what you're going to ask them, the panel, and walk away with an offer. So it's pretty much how that all works out. I'm just going to whiz through this really quickly. You are getting a recording of this along with a bunch of other information, but anyone considering the UK, this is where these are our office locations across the UK. London's very different too. I was in London on Friday actually, and it's a huge city. I forget how big it is, but I think you're somewhere in the middle down here, right? Is that right, Thomas, right now? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, I'm right by that arrow is almost pointing to my house, regional Wales. I'm just to the right of that.
Okay.
But in England.
Yeah, right. And everything's pretty close and user friendly in the UK as compared to places like Australia. So there's both country and regional and metropolitan opportunities there for anyone interested. And then we move on to New Zealand. We have 2 offices there in Auckland and Wellington on the North Island. So again, they're smaller cities than what some of you might be used to, but similar visa requirements as to Australia and the UK. We can unpack that one-on-one at a later date as well. And then we move into Australia, where our opportunities are across these different office locations. It's a big country. So, but there's nothing to say you can't work in multiple states across the country. But there's some high-level information about some of where our offices are, and it certainly doesn't mean you have to work close to an office. We have, educators that work in far north Queensland that are managed by the Brisbane office, which is, could be 20-hour drive from the Brisbane office in some instances. But we'll give you all that information and insight at a later date. UAE, your best place to talk through this one.
Yeah, for sure. So it depends where you're kind of coming from. So working visas are organised by the school, like we discussed. You need to be a qualified teacher, but that's aligned. So again, discussed. There is this possibility where you can be a freelancer, but it's extremely challenging to go through that route because you've got to pay for your own visa, you've got to pay for your own medical insurance. So I'd always recommend just getting a job before you come, rather than going through the kind of somewhat stressful process of trying to set it up yourself, just because UAE there's different versus somewhere like Australia where that process might be a little bit more straightforward. In the UAE it's not as straightforward. Lots of different curriculums are available. So we said that, whether it's IB curriculum, national curriculum for England, I always refer to it as UK, but I get told off for that. Australian curriculum. There's the reason I put Sharjah as a location is because there's non-for-profit schools in Sharjah that have really strong reviews. One's known as a VISS, so it's Victoria International School or International School or something along those lines. Non-for-profit essentially means that the profits that the school make go back into the school, whereas for-profit, which is the majority of the different schools there, the schools go to shareholders. And although you'd probably be a bit concerned about that, most schools in the UAE now are for-profit, and it doesn't really affect you as a teacher too much. So don't worry about that. And a lot of people sometimes ask, well, can I go straight out there? Do I have to do 2 years in the UK or Australia? And the answer, if you're a UK trained teacher, is yes. You can go and do your ECT years in there, but you sometimes have to fund that yourself. They might not be as set up to support you necessarily. I still recommend doing that time in the UK, but yeah, it's one of those things. And the QR code is up there as well if you want to know a little bit more information, not just about the UAE, but also the GCC region. Teach Abroad Atlas, I've just released that recently, and it will give you a good overview of different regions that you can potentially teach into. But that's for you to just go and check out. And that QR code will take you to my blog. Lots and lots of free information that you can just have a little look at and give you some more insight into the region and teaching out there too.
Nice. Some really sharp resources there. Quickly, just this, I talked a bit about community before, but I'll send you some information about how to get involved in our online communities. We've got Facebook groups, and certainly other avenues where you can meet other educators in your home country or in the destination country too. And if you don't believe everything that we're telling you, it's always good to talk to educators that are actually living the dream over there, or have done it. They'll give you the real raw truth behind it. So I'll share that. I guess before we answer a few questions, just to unpack what the next steps could look like. So anyone, I guess, that has an interest, even if it's a small interest in the UAE, Thomas, we talked about this post webinar when the recording comes back all branded and nice. We're going to send you out the recording, and we're going to send you out Thomas's some of the resources he talked about, and also his contact information if you're not already following him. So if you have any questions for Thomas around UAE or his journey or any other advice you'd be seeking, you're happy for people to reach out via that email or that QR code, Thomas?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then same for Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. I'll send you in that email. There'll be some links to schedule some time with the team to talk about whatever it might be. It could be a mixture of those, or it could be one of them. I actually had a poll that I might still host in a second. I just remembered it. I just wanted to find out what people are thinking. And I'll also send you some links towards our blog pages, the communities I just talked about, and what else was there in there? Oh, events, upcoming other webinars. So, we're talking about, I don't know, pay rates. So we're talking about visas, we're talking about tax, we're talking about getting your long-term contract. That's one of our September webinars, but there's always something up on our website as well. Have a look at one of the questions here is from Marina too, which talks about investigating the visa type. So what visa are you eligible for? So it's about first understanding what country you want to go to, and then the official websites, the immigration websites are the best place to find out what visa you could be eligible for. We can talk through that one-on-one with you, but it just depends which direction you're going on as to how much advice or guidance we can give you. Sometimes we're allowed to give a lot, sometimes we're not. But as Thomas said, the UAE is quite simple and straightforward for working rights. Have a look at the calendar. Have a look at your, when you think is the best time to arrive. Do you need to work when you first get there? Have you got only a few pennies in the bank account, or have you got some cash behind you to sponsor a road trip across the UAE or the east coast of Australia, or via Thailand and Vietnam on the way? Some people get to their destination countries in different ways. Some people get there on a shoestring with no money and have to work the very next day, and others are like, no, I'm happy just to get over the jet lag, find a house, work out where I want to be, and then I'll get a job. But I guess just to be clear, ANZ UK will do the legwork in finding you the role. That's what we do, and it is a free service. Think about the referees. Thomas said it was critical for the UAE. Think about who they and don't assume they're going to be your referees. Please ask them. Say, look, I'm thinking about this teaching experience. I'd love it if you were my referee. And most of them should say, yes, I'd love to be your referee too. But don't make it a surprise. And if we reach out to them, they go, I didn't know that Peter was thinking about this. He didn't ask me. So just please ask before assuming, and then get strapped in for your adventure. Say your goodbyes, have your farewell parties, pack your bags. Make sure your utility bills are getting cancelled or stopped, and tying up all loose ends, and just get on the big tin bird and get yourself into that next country. What else would you like to add to that, Thomas?
No, that's it. So it's an opportunity to get excited about that process. It's absolutely going to be something that, if you decide to go down that route, will be a life-changing thing. I always think that everyone should have that opportunity to kind of explore somewhere different, like we said at the start, to kind of round things off. Yeah, it's just something that will allow you to kind of explore other avenues and definitely experience new things that you perhaps wouldn't in your home culture.
There's a few questions here. Sorry if I haven't. Marina, we talked about this before. The right working rights. It's dependent on where you're going to be and where you're going to go. We can talk you through that individually. And a bunch more other questions here. We've got, do you help in finding suitable teaching positions? Could you give some idea about working rights? Again, we'll sit down and we'll talk about that. Hi, I'm teaching Qatar 5 years now. Part of the contract is that 2 flights, housing or allowance are included in the contract. Would this be included with job contracts in Oz and New Zealand? Unfortunately not, unless it was a very highly prestigious school. It wouldn't be an opportunity, unfortunately. I wish it could be, but yeah, at this point in time, there's not many schools that would give you those kind of perks. Is that typical for UAE, Thomas, to get those kind of perks included in a contract?
Yeah, so this is where you kind of talk about the pros and cons of different countries. Obviously, we spoke about the UK, Australia, New Zealand being a bit more flexible with things, so you can come and explore different schools. With the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, those packages typically include accommodation. I think it's part of their law as well, where it has to be included within the contracts. But on the flip side, there is that lock-in, if you like, where you're somewhat locked into that contract, and you don't get to explore other schools either. So yes, you have that setup of accommodation, but then that's you don't get that flexibility. So pros and cons. There's trade-offs with every country, but yeah, it is typical.
I had a poll and it hasn't saved, unfortunately, so I can't launch it. But basically, we just wanted to understand which destination you were thinking, or destinations. Another question here before we sign off is, would primary school teachers be considered as a related occupation to a secondary teacher when applying for a visa? This is because I have my teaching experience in primary education, but have a positive skills assessment as a secondary teacher. So I think if you're primary trained and have no secondary experience, schools would not be considering you for a secondary role. I know that I'm secondary trained and I worked in a lot of primary settings abroad in the UK and in Europe. It typically doesn't work the other way around. If I'm primary trained, you typically don't work in secondary settings. Would that be the case in the UAE too, Thomas?
UAE is highly based on, so the KHDA, for example, with Dubai would decide, okay, you have this type of experience with your degree. So if it's English, you have to be English teacher. Whether it's primary, secondary, doesn't matter too much. But then you've got to think about the school. The school's going to be looking at the CV and going, okay, you've got lots of primary experience. Why are you applying for a secondary one? And it might be when you start at primary level and you say you express your interest in going into secondary, and you're doing perhaps 1 day a week of secondary in a very similar way to kind of working alongside a teacher like you would with your initial teacher training. Perhaps that's an entry route into secondary teaching. Schools might be a bit more flexible with that, because schools in the UAE are kind of primary and secondary merged together, so that option is there. But no, again, typically they would be looking at primary or secondary and kind of restricting on that basis.
Okay. And the final question from Sadie before we do sign off, because we've gone over time. If a job was advertised in the UAE for January, is that too early? Is it best to wait for August 2025 roles?
No, it depends how ready you are. If you're ready to move straight away in January, let's say you've not got a job lined up at the moment and you're kind of looking at the next few months, and going, right, I could move in January, then you could move in January. It would be a little bit more intense because you're starting probably straight away, going straight away with a class that's already established. They'll have their routines established. But if you think that that's for you, you can absolutely do that. And sometimes good opportunities come about in January because schools are kind of, like you said, with kind of the October Easter region, schools are crying out potentially for teachers because they might have had people during their probation period drop out. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, we need a teacher from somewhere. So sometimes packages can be a little bit better. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's too early. There's a lot more available in August, but it's completely up to you and whether you feel ready for that.
I'd back that up too. I'd say 3 to 6 months is probably the ideal amount of time to get you ready, to get you compliant, to get all your ducks in a row. for Australia or for any opportunity, I'd say that 6 months is the average amount of time from the time we speak to an educator to the time they arrive in a destination country. But I'd say 3 to 6 months is a good amount of time to get you ready. Some people would just say, like, I've booked my flights, I'm going in 2 weeks, can you help me? And we would absolutely do that. But some things like teacher registration, as an example, can take up to 8 weeks to process, and that's out of our control. So I think we'll leave it there, and we will follow up with an email and hopefully a one-on-one conversation and get you ready for your adventure, wherever that might be. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Thomas, especially for sharing your insights and your stories. I was very curious about the UAE, and you certainly answered a few of my questions. We'll get that email out to you with the follow-up recording and those other links and resources that we talked about. It may not get to you till Friday, so just hold on to your hats till then, because I want the marketing team to make it a bit more palatable than what it is in its raw form. But thanks again. My parting words would be, roll with this interest in travel. Don't let it just sit there, because that window will close. As I said, I had friends that said they'd go abroad and teach, but they got offered promotions at home or locally. They had kids, they had mortgages, they have all these other grown-up adult responsibilities that sort of, not to say that's a roadblock to getting overseas, but it certainly makes things a bit more difficult for them, and they never went. So grab the bull by the horns. We're really keen to talk with you and unpack your adventure with you one-on-one. What would be your final comments, Thomas?
I'd say research. You can never do enough research. So just, if you're looking into things and you're taking action, just start by looking at start by thinking about who you are as a person, what would align with you, then look at the location, right? What location matches me, whether it's Australia and the lifestyle there, or perhaps the UAE and what that might provide for you. Look at the location and then zoom into the schools. What types of schools are available in those locations? What are the facilities like? How do you align with things? But it all comes down to research.
Yep. Just awareness and be educated on what you're getting into. And we'll certainly do our best to arm you with that information. Okay, we're going to say happy Tuesday, 30th of July. We hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are, morning, evening, depending on the time zone. Looking forward to having a conversation with you all one-on-one. Thanks again, Thomas. Take care, enjoy your summer, and we will speak soon.
Thank you very much.